electric vehicle infrastructure program where we're distributing $5 billion to states to establish a car charging network along our highways, as well as a companion program called community charging, which is another 2.5. They do carry standards. We don't want to dictate, of course, all of the particulars of charging stations that will typically be owned and operated by the private sector. But we do need to make sure certain things are true about them. We need to make sure that you are not, for example, confined to an individual network in order to be able to purchase power from a given charging station. Right now, that's often the case. And so it's as if you could only fill up at a Speedway gas station if you were a Speedway member, but not if you were a BP member, right? We need to make these interoperable. And accessibility is one of the considerations that's going into this as well. And as we work with our counterparts in the Department of Energy to lay out those requirements and expectations for the states in their investments, we're going to be within reason laying out some standards and expectations for how those chargers ought to work. Well, one thing we're trying to support is active transportation. So we need to make sure that people are able to walk or bike or roll to wherever they need to be. And I think that's something that has been maybe more familiar for people living in city centers of dense urban areas, but can bring benefit everywhere in the country. When we adopted a complete streets approach in my hometown of South Bend, for example, that really opened up what had been a road pattern that was almost hostile to any traffic besides a vehicle. It really opened that up to people and through that to small business too, because it became a more inviting place to have a cup of coffee or browse the store. So all of these things add up to, I think, a more vibrant local economy, and they add up to more ease for people getting to where they need to go, especially when you start from the principle of safety. And that's really what's on our mind as we work to make active transportation available to more Americans. Many of our grant programs do just that. E-bikes hold the promise of making it more natural for a lot of people to commute to work by bike. I think that they present an opportunity in terms of people who are maybe not don't think of themselves as athletes or aren't able to bike longer distances on a traditional bike, to now have a new means to get around. Again, safety has to be our guiding principle. So, local communities, I think, are dealing with the necessity of managing the shared spaces and just the rules of the road in a way that is safe, because these e-bikes can go obviously faster, not just farther, than traditional bicycles. But we see a lot of potential there, and we want to support local community visions for how they want to put these technologies to use. Yeah, the great thing about this role and the daunting thing about this moment is that we need to be delivering improvements to every mode of transportation in the country. And we have provisions in this new infrastructure law that touch everything from commercial aviation to pipeline safety. Matter of fact, we're administering a pipeline safety improvement program that's not getting as much attention as some of the other things, but it just gives you a sense of the range of what we do. We work on commercial space travel, port improvements, anything related to how people or goods move around. We tend to have some role in it. And what we're very proud of with this infrastructure deal is the opportunity to make more improvements than we have in certainly my lifetime. Everything from the ASAP program that we're rolling out next week, improvements to stations across the country for transit accessibility, to the airport terminal program, which also, by the way, did a lot for accessibility. A lot of ADA improvements are coming to airports around America now through this funding. we're proud to be able to bring that to communities of different sizes. By many measures, the U.S. doesn't have a single airport in the world's top 25 now, and that's something that we want to change. The president definitely wants to change it, and it starts with the basics, making sure that airports, before we even get to the finer points of the aesthetics of them, we just need to make sure they work well and that they work well for everybody. So this round of terminal grants alone was 84 different airports were able to make a difference, and they're big recognizable ones like LAX, all the way down to Chamberlain, South Dakota, where their general aviation terminal right now is a mobile home, and we're funding them to have a permanent building. But in places like in between, like Huntsville, Alabama, which will get new, better restrooms and finally be able to get ADA compliance in areas where they hadn't before. Yeah, there was a Cash for Clunkers program, I think, during the Obama administration. The approach that we've pursued has had to do with reducing the upfront sticker price of EVs through tax credits, although unfortunately there's been a lot of congressional, mostly Republican opposition to that, so it hasn't passed. But we are seeing that the scale effects are starting to pull down the cost of EVs too. The cost of charging is a little different because it's in the hands of utilities, and there are 3,000 different utilities across the country. But we're certainly interested to see what kinds of approaches will be taken locally. For example, I used to run a utility as mayor because I oversaw the water works, and one of the uses that my successor put rescue plan dollars to was to reduce or forgive utility bills for low-income residents on their water charges. So there are ways this can be done. It varies from state to state, and it gets a little difficult for us from the federal level on the transportation side of the house to have all the visibility into that. But we're certainly interested in approaches that will make the charging as well as the purchasing of electric vehicles more affordable for more Americans. One thing that a lot of folks don't realize is that you can often charge a vehicle with a regular wall plug. That's what, frankly, that's what Chasten and I do in Michigan with our plug-in hybrid. Although it's quicker and more efficient if you can get a level 2 charger. But that only helps you if you live in a single-family home or you have a garage. A lot of people in multifamily dwellings also live in areas where it's not yet profitable for a company to install a charger, for example, in the parking lot of your apartment building. That's where we think the community charging funding that we're going to be distributing can make a difference. We buy down the difference where it doesn't pencil out just yet for the private sector. But when we get that charger up, it helps drive adoption and helps, of course, people get in on the fuel savings that come with owning. Funded for this fiscal year, we'll get the first of 5 years, which across 5 years will be $2.5 billion. That'll go alongside the $5 billion, so about $1 billion a year. That's going to the states for their own plans. Those are more oriented toward building out the network of chargers across the U.S. highway system. We do everything from overseeing the Academy for Merchant Mariners in Kings Point, New York, to licensing commercial space launches. And so I think everybody knows we're the Department of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but even I am repeatedly struck by the sheer range of things we get to work on. But they're all important, and they're all exciting, and there's never been a better time to do this work. Yeah, it's, we're trying to strike an appropriate balance in terms of our own travel, even just how I get around the city. So one idea that I, to be honest, stole from Secretary Granholm is to convert one of my security detail vehicles to an electric car so that I can get around DC on a zero emissions basis. But of course, part of my job is to travel, to be in lots of different places at once. And we want to see, feel, and experience what's happening on the ground so that we can make the best possible decisions as we guide what's ultimately going to be roughly half of the $1.2 trillion in the president's infrastructure plan.